All right. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the GRE workshop. Uh, this will basically serve as a guide to as to how you're supposed to prepare for the GRE and just kind of provide this overall overview in terms of how you are going to be approaching the exam. So we'll be touching upon three major things. The overall content, that is, what is the GRE, what are, some of its components, and then we'll break down those components individually and go through those. And then we'll learn how to sort of overall approach or strategize when it comes to learning the GRE. I'll give you a few tips, and then to end it, we'll top it off with a few strategies that you could use. So you would have a broader, like going into the GRE prep, you have a broader understanding of how to go about the entire exam. So before we begin, let's give an overview of myself. My name is Mahnoor Toor. I am a Fulbright alumna. I graduated recently this year, but I'm from the batch 2023 to 2025. I did my Master's of Arts in Economic Development from Vanderbilt University, and I am based in Lahore, Pakistan. Currently, I am working as a research analyst at the Punjab's Sustainable Development Goals Unit, which is basically a project by the United Nations Development Program. It's been 6 months that I've been working here. But back when I started preparing for the GRE, I remember it was a pretty daunting topic for me, especially given that I was someone who really feared standardized testing, the idea of, having to sit within a certain time constraint and having to, do multiple questions within that time constraint. It was something that was really scary for me. But then over time, during my preparation, I understood that, just having the right approach is what matters. So throughout this session, I will be emphasizing on the fact that it's extremely important to have a right approach and to not just blindly start studying for the GRE, because it's not a test, like a quintessential test that you're giving. It's a test that kind of um, tests your skills in terms of how well or you perform under time. So it all just basically asks for time management and practice and just having the right approach. So let's begin. So introducing the GRE. The GRE, the most of you would probably know what it is, but I'm assuming now that, a lot of you, there might be most of you that might be to an extent familiar with the idea of it. Some of you might not be familiar with what it is. So I'm going to be starting off with the basics. So it's basically it stands for graduate record examination. It's a standardized exam. It's used primarily for your graduate program admissions, and it basically assesses your ability in these four, key areas, which is whether you can comprehend complex written materials, whether you can solve quantitative problems, whether you can analyze information critically, and then finally communicate your ideas clearly and effectively. So these are, something. So the GRE is basically an exam that is standardized across, all the fields, basically to ensure and to filter out people when they're applying for their graduate admissions in the United States, primarily to ensure that everyone is on the same level field before they apply. And so this is the best way to be able to do that, to level the playing field, to have, people from different countries enter a program where they all know what to expect. And so, in order to do that, you need to have a certain type of test, which is why the GRE is important. Moving on. So, these are the three major components for the GRE. The first one is the qualitative section. It basically is called the verbal reasoning section. You have the quantitative section then, which is known as the quantitative reasoning section, and then you have the essay, which is known as your analytical writing. So this square right here, This rectangle right here that I've shared, it's basically, how your score is finally displayed. This person here has gotten a perfect score, but you can see that it shows you a, reasonable breakdown of how, you will be measured when how your score will be measured once you perform or you give the exam. So the score ranges from 130 to 170. So even if you do really, really bad, the minimum score that you would get would be 130, and the maximum you can get per section would be 170. And so the total score is therefore 340. And then you have an analytical writing section, which is your essay, and that is basically scored out of 6. And that is basically a separate score that you get apart from the total 340 that you have, which comprises your verbal reasoning and then your quantitative reasoning sections. I see someone has raised their hands. I would want to take the questions towards the end of this video. So first, I'll go through everything. All of you can make your questions, and then we'll leave like 20 minutes for questions. Okay, so let's move on. So when you're giving the test, there's two orders that the tests will appear in. It's always going to begin with the essay. We're going to get into the timings, we're going to get into the breakdown, the number of questions right after this. But these are the two orders in which, you would be getting the test. So it would either be order one, which starts with essay, followed by your first verbal section, followed by your first quant section, verbal, and then quant again. Or the other order, which, as always, will begin by essay, followed by quant, verbal, quant, verbal. So it's always a surprise, but there will be two quant sessions and two verbal sessions that you would have to give when you're giving your or attempting the test. So the test format overall, we're going to pick out one format. Let's assume this right here is the format that you're getting your test in. You have your quant, your verbal, your quant, and verbal two. These are the amount of questions that you get per section. So you have for quant one, you have 12 questions, and you have 21 minutes to perform that question. Before that, my apologies, you have the essay, which is just one essay. So when I gave my GRE, I remember it being extremely exhausting because it took us about double the time that it takes now. So it was 4 hours for the entire test with little amount of breaks, but just overall very exhausting. It really took the energy out of you. So the test gods have really, really, really done a good job here because they've decreased the time by half. And so now you have just 2 hours, around 2 hours to perform to attempt the whole test. They will start with just one essay. There used to be two before, so now you just have one. We will get into each section one by one as well. And then you have your first quant section, which will be 12 questions for 21 minutes. Then your first verbal section, which will be 12 questions for 18 minutes. Then the second quant section, which is for 15 minutes, 15 questions for 26 minutes. And then your second verbal section, which will be 15 questions for 23 minutes. The only catch here is that you will not have any break. So even though the test cards have been really, really nice, they've given you 2 hours, a total of 54 questions, there will be no breaks. But there's always exceptions that you can apply for on the ETS website. If you are someone who has a hard time concentrating, if you're diagnosed with, say, ADHD, or you have bathroom issues and you have to go constantly, you can apply for that on the ETS website. And so before the test, they will account for that. Okay. So this is how the GRE is scored today. Section-wise, we have 27 verbal questions, again, with a breakdown of 12 plus 15 per section. The same with quant. So it's the same for quant and same for verbal. And so you can score 130 to 170. Again, if you do really, really badly on your GRE, if you say answer nothing at all, you will still get a 130. But if you manage to do somewhat good or somewhat decent, you will get a score ranging from 130 to 170. And then a perfect score for one section would be 170. So the total score that you can get would be a minimum of 260 to a perfect score, which would then be a 340. So that is basically the breakdown of your GRE. And then you have your essay, which ranges from 0 to 6. You just have one essay, one analytical writing section to do. And the scoring pattern for that is incremental in the sense that you can get scores in point fives. So you can get a 4.5, you could get a 5. So it basically is incremental by point 0.5. And it ranges from 0 to 6. Moving on. So before we move on to breaking to like the proper breakdown of everything that happened within the test, how you go about it, let's understand a few important test notes. I've already made this clear. The previous GRE length was double, twice the length that it is now. The current format is significantly shorter. Another important thing to understand is that the GRE is section adaptive. You have 4 sections in total, which I told you before. So when you begin with one section, depending on how well you perform in that particular section, the second section will adapt to it. So it'll adapt to how you perform in the first section. So say I have done a medium job on my first section, my first quant, I have done a medium job, and say the next section will also be quant. So given how I have performed in my first quant section, it'll adapt and it'll give me a slightly higher version, a slightly harder version than the medium section that I performed in my first. If you've done really, really well, unfortunately, but fortunately, it'll give you a harder section when you start the next section, basically. So that's why the GRE is section adaptive. Some people like to say that it's question adaptive, like, oh, if say I'm giving attempting the quant section and I do well and on like the first question, the second one will be harder. If I do well on the second question, the third one will be harder. No, the GRE is not that scary. It's section adaptive. So one section is good. The average of that will be taken into account, and so the next question will adapt accordingly. Another important test note is that online calculators are available for use. So you will have an option to click on the calculator option while you're performing your tests. I would not recommend doing this because it takes a lot of time. So there are certain tips and tricks that you should learn, which I will talk about later, that kind of help you avoid using the laptop, the calculator. You should know square roots. You should know, how to multiply certain big numbers that are used later when you learn how to strategize and how to apply those strategies when you're preparing for the GRE. So the calculator should only be used when you know that it can't be solved, by yourself, with like via mental math. And then I already told you that there are no scheduled breaks, and testing accommodations, depending on your medical conditions, your health conditions, they are available through ETS online. Okay. Let's now move on to the study approach. Okay. So I remember when I was in that stage where I was, preparing for the GRE, my first question was that I need a plan. Naturally so. The key here is that there is no specific plan. That is the approach that I'm trying to, inculcate through this video, that there is no fixed study plan that you should have for your GRE. The structure of how you will study for your GRE depends on you. It's very specific to the person who is planning on giving it. There are people who are English majors, there are people who are math majors, there are people who are, psychologists. And so everyone stands at a very different position. And so you kind of need to just focus on your path and see where you are standing to define what you need to do and how much time you need to take to do it and how you need to do it. So you have to see your current skill level, assess your strengths and weaknesses, and then also see how much time you have left before the exam, the next exam that you could take, maybe your, the deadline for the university that you're interested to apply for, or the Fulbright deadline is nearing, and you're a bit frazzled, and you realize you have to give the GRE, and then you're also juggling your perhaps undergrad finals, which is what I was going through. And so you really have to plan strategically in terms of yourself. So the first thing you need to do once you decide that you will give the GRE is to assess where you stand. That is the first approach. You can't blindly go buy the books and cover each and every page of that book. That will not be helpful. It's not a typical math exam. It's not a typical English exam. It's different. It's assessing very different things that I'd mentioned in the start. It's trying to assess how you think, how you perform under time, so your approach should basically be centered around that, because that is the objective of the GRE. Once you understand that, your approach will automatically adapt. So number one, you need to understand that you may already be strong in either sections. See, if you're an engineer, perhaps, you might be really adept at math. You might be really good at math, right? So an honest assessment is also very, very essential. You need to be really honest to yourself when you're studying for the GRE. It's very natural for you to believe that you know how percentages work, or you know how sentence structures are made, or how and you have a pretty decent vocabulary, a pretty decent English vocabulary. But to be able to realize how decent you are at it when it comes to the GRE, an honest assessment is essential. So the first step is to assess yourself. Now, these are some of the resources that I have gathered that are essential for pre-preparation before you begin, right? The first thing which I would recommend would be to give a test, to give a GRE test without having any preparation at all, right? You could either the best source for this would be the ETS website. They offer a mini quiz that you can take, a free mini quiz that you can take to see where you're standing. There's this really amazing website online which is called GregMat. I would recommend it a lot. There is a subscription for it, but it's pretty reasonable if you compare it with other sources. Um, and they provide three practice tests as well. So you could just hop on that website, go to the ETS website, just pick one, quality over quantity, and then give that test to see where you stand. If you're someone who's extremely scared about the quant section, because we like to believe generally, there's a perception that we'd be able to do verbal. Verbal will not be a big deal, although it is something to strategize over as well. But for people who are history majors, perhaps, or, someone who's not that adept at mathematics, or, it's been a while since they've, touched or gone through these basic concepts, the best way to go about it would be to go through those assessment quizzes. It would be nice if you could take a screenshot of the slide perhaps, but I also know that this video will be uploaded online to the USEFP page. So you can use these links to sort of assess yourself when it comes to just like individual topics of mathematics. Or if you do not have enough time, because these assessment quizzes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're a bit lengthy, but it's a good way to assess yourself. But if you don't have time, you can take these full rapid fire GRE foundation tests as well. And then there's so many other options that you have. The Fortunately and unfortunately, there are too many resources available. The game here is to pick the most important ones and focus on those. So quality over quantity. Assess yourself. Okay. Once you assess yourself, and now you know where you stand, you know your maybe perhaps your arithmetic skills are, stellar, but you have a lot of work to do in data analysis, you know, you move on to your resources. And these are the resource books that I always recommend, and I was recommended these sources as well. These are the non-negotiables. ETS, the ETS resources. You go on the ETS website and you will have these. Um, ETS is basically, they're the makers of the GRE. It's the company that, you know, started the GRE. It makes the questions from scratch. So the best way to learn is to refer to the sources who have made the GRE, refer to the makers, the pioneers. So you go to the ETS website, you get these books. These are 4 books that are amazing. You initially go through the official GRE guide book, followed by 2 separate books for verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning. And then, if once you have mastered these books, you move on for further practice. So the idea is to go through these books, not not like, the idea is not to go through every page step by step. The idea is to go through those ideas or concepts that you're not familiar with or you're not so good at, and you think you require more practice in those sessions. So you basically go through those pages, right? It should be specific to you, how you study for the GRE. So once you think you have practiced enough from these first 3 books, which is the official guide, the GRE official verbal reasoning, and official quantitative reasoning section books, then you move on to the GRE Big Book. This book is amazing. It's not available on the ETS website anymore, but there's PDFs available on Google. It has 27 practice tests that you can practice from. You can do untimed practice from it, or you could pick, because it's basically formatted around the old format. You will have the old amount of number of questions in it, which were a lot more than the ones that you have now, because now you have 12 and 15 questions per section for both quant and verbal. So you can time it according to your format, because nothing has really changed with how with the changes that have happened within the test, except for the timing. They've just made it shorter. Everything else is the same. So you can time it according to yourself and use this for practice as well. Once you are sure and you are confident that you have covered all of these books properly, and you know the strategies, you've really like memorized them, you've applied them, and you're sure about it, only then you move on to supplementary practice material if you have time. If you don't and you have these 4 books covered, you are good to go, as long as you've mastered them honestly. But if you want more practice, if you have that time, if you have that privilege, these are some of the supplementary materials that you can go through. There's this 5 pound book of the GRE practice problems by Manhattan Prep. You have Princeton Review, which is another really good source. You have Barron's GRE practice guides. And then these 2 that I mentioned are GregMat and Magoosh. GregMat and Magoosh are online sources that are really, really good. I personally consulted ETS, followed by GregMat for additional practice. They also make you practice through ETS. So they also emphasize that it is non-negotiable, that you have to, study from ETS resources. So GregMat is great. It's also cheaper. And then you have Magoosh. Magoosh is another online resource that's really, really good. If you have, if any of you have questions which you think should be asked right now, please like leave me a message so I can get back to you there and then. If you think you can wait till the end of the session to ask me those questions, perfect. If you have a question, do leave it in the chat so that I can get back to it. Because right now, I'm like going through the slides, so in between I can stop whenever I feel the need to, and then I can answer your questions. But just leave them in the chat so I can get back to you there. So continuing, Another really important section or another important component within the GRE is your vocabulary. Um, it's a lot of words that you have to learn. And so that can definitely be overwhelming. But the approach as to how to go about your vocab would basically it just requires consistency. The idea is to know a minimum of 1,000 words, not 700, not 800, but 1,000 words minimum to be able to do decently on the text completions, the sentences. Now, you may be extremely good at English, or you may not be that, well versed, but the average would be a minimum of 1,000 words. These are some of the sources that you have. You have the Kaplan GRE vocabulary flashcards. You can make flashcards for yourself as well. You also have the Barron's GRE essential words. You have the GRE prep for dummies, which is another friendly guide that you could refer to. And then a lot of these websites, you have GregMat, Magoosh, ETS, they have a list of words that you can refer to as well. Let me see if I have any questions. Okay, so there's no questions in the chat box as of yet. Okay, moving on. So once you've assessed yourself and you have your resources ready, say you understand that the ETS resources are important, and so you pick that book, and that's all you have. You don't need to buy 100 books altogether. You pick one and you start working on it because quality over quantity is what matters. So this is how you will be going about the test prep order. I think I misspelled that, but the test prep order. So, um, when it comes to quantitative reasoning, which is the first the section, one of the sections, first of all, you build upon your quant foundations. The most important thing here is that you need to know these topics within mathematics to be able to know that you have a pretty good grasp of the entire quant section. And so those topics would include arithmetic, algebra, coordinate geometry, and data analysis. You need to be well versed in all of these topics because most of the topics that you get range, from these sources, from these topics. So you practice those without any time constraints. Just make sure you understand how you do them. You understand the concepts. You familiarize yourself with the concepts you weren't familiar with before, or you had, probably forgotten about. And then you focus on the strategies. The strategy is the most important thing because the GRE will not give you straight, direct questions in terms of, and then you'll have to solve them. It'll be something that it intentionally requires you to strategize around. So the whole game is to know the strategy, to master the strategies that you can use when you're, performing the exam. So first, you need to be aware of those strategies. You do that by practicing, by reading the books, by understanding how to solve the different types of questions that you get within the test. Uh, I think I have a question. I just got a question in the chat box. There we go. Okay, the first question is how much score did you achieve in the GRE and which year did you give? So I gave my GRE in 2023 and I had a score of 315. My main struggle was with the verbal reasoning. It seems as if it would be easier than the math section, but it's tricky. You have to really strategize around that. This is being recorded and this will be posted online. And Magoosh, again, as I mentioned, is great. You should definitely go for it. The point is to stick to one source, but begin with the ETS resources first. So my top two resources would definitely be the ETS, followed by, personally for me, was GregMat. But just because I'm saying GregMat doesn't mean it has to be the second, like it has to be the best one. Magoosh can be better as well. So whatever suits you, just pick one and stick to it. Okay. Um, okay. Another question is that if you should give your test in the center or at home, it depends on you. The GRE completely depends on you and how you approach the exam. If you're comfortable giving it at home, it I would say giving it at home for me required a lot of confidence. Because I was a bit anxious about, whether I would have electricity issues, whether my family members would barge into the room. So because of those reasons, I prefer to give it at the center. So it's completely up to you. It does not define your score. Like it doesn't change your score whether you give it from home or you give it from the center. I'll get back to your questions because there are many towards the end, and then hopefully they will be answered while I'm explaining everything to you as well. Okay, so we were on strategies for uh, 1 second. Yes. So for the quant section, you have the foundation, you learn the strategies, and then you learn to apply the strategies in an untimed practice. Once you are adept at that, you then move on and practice within the time constraints. For the verbal reasoning, it's the same. You start with vocabulary. And then vocabulary is something that goes on throughout your GRE preparation. So the point is to start with it, whether it's 10 days, 10 words a day, whether it's 20 words a day, depending on how long you would take. That's how you would go about with strategy, but you start with that. And when you are learning vocabulary, it is important to not just understand the literal meaning, but also to understand the context within which that word is being used. So what I did was, when I was preparing for vocabulary, I made a short notebook for myself. Some people make flashcards. I made a notebook for myself where I basically would basically make a list of 20 words every day and then make a sentence out of those words so I know what context it's being used in, because it would help me within the verbal section, especially when it comes to text completion questions, which I will get into later. It'll help you greatly. So the more you know, the better it is. So the same with verbal, you learn your vocabularies, you learn the strategies, you practice in an untimed environment. You start with the easy order, medium, and hard, and then you have your timed practice again with easy, medium, and then hard questions. Okay. So before I move on, let me just go through the average time that you should take when you're preparing for the GRE. The average time for me personally would be 2 to 3 months. Now, for someone who has a really good grasp and is comfortable within the standardized testing environment, it can take a month as well. So I know people who have performed exceptionally well in the GRE within a month, after a preparation of a month. And then I know people who have given it 3 to 4 months as well. So the average, I would say, would be 2 to 3 months of preparation. But that again that basically depends on where you stand and how much time you have left when the next GRE happens. Okay. Another question that I'm seeing is that, what's a good score? Um, Logically, so like a good score would be a perfect score or anything above a 300. But then again, a good score is, when it comes to your graduate studies, very subjective. For a degree like that is more math heavy, they it depends on the degree basically. If it's a math heavy degree, they would require a higher quant score. So this depends on the degree that you're applying to. If it, and it's on their admissions website. So, say you want to go to X university, you go to their admission process window, and they say that they need a minimum of 160 out of 170 on the quant section because it's an engineering degree, right? But if you are applying for, say, history, they would say you need a minimum of 140 on the math section and a minimum of say 160 150 on the verbal section. So it's very subjective. The idea is to, yes, perform as well as you can, but if you do not score well, it doesn't matter because it depends on the program that you're applying to. If you're someone who's interested in engineering, then of course you'll have to work harder on the quant part as well as the verbal if you're passionate enough to be aiming for an Ivy League perhaps. But the idea is that it's primarily subjective. So if you're someone who's applying, you're a history student and you want to get a 340, like a full perfect score, great. But it's okay if you don't either, because the requirement is what matters. It's very requirement specific. So you don't need to be scared that you need a certain level of certain score of GRE, because it's not really a test of your intelligence. It's basically just a tool through which you're leveling the playing field. That's it. So if you perform as well as your university or your required program wants you to, you're great. You're good to go. So now let's move on to what the test looks like. I will be going through each section, quant and qual, and I will show you some of the questions and perhaps we'll go through certain strategies together as well. The idea here is that this is not a strategies class. I would love to go and sit and go through each and every question and make you understand what strategy is used. So perhaps this isn't really a class that focuses on that, but it's basically just an idea that I will be giving to you, so you have sort of an understanding in terms of how these strategies work, so that these are not all the strategies. There's multiple strategies, there's multiple question types, but I will try to go to through one for each question type that you have, so you have a better idea once you start to begin your prep, or perhaps you're already preparing, but you would have a better idea in terms of how to apply your strategy, because that is really the game. The game is not to know percentages. The game is not to know how to add and subtract and multiply. The game is to know how to apply, to know strategies, and then to further apply those strategies. So let's begin with this now. Let's begin with the verbal section. So the types of questions in the verbal sections, you have three major types of questions that you get. I will show you what they look like as well. The first one is the text completion sentence. This basically is that you would get a sentence. It could be a long sentence or it could be really, really short with fill in with blanks that you would have to fill in. You could either get a single blank, a double blank, or a triple blank sentence that you would have to fill in. And beneath that sentence, you would have multiple options, an option of six, 4 to 6 to choose from, options to choose from. They would have words that you would have to choose, pick and choose, and then fill in the blanks according to the sentence. So, in the two verbal sections that you have, you would get a range of 3 to 4 text completion sentences. And these types of questions are the ones that appear first. When you click on begin the verbal section, you start normally with a text completion sentence. The second type of questions that you would get would be your sentence equivalence questions. So Your sentence equivalence sentences are also, they range from 3 to 4 questions per section. Again, they are sentences that are always single blank. So there's always going to be one blank in them. And then you would have an answer choice that would be comprise a total of 6 options. And you would have to basically pick two answers or two words that go well within that blank. And those two words will be synonym, meaning that they will mean the same thing or imply the same thing. So this is where your vocabulary really helps. Generally, vocabulary is important because when you're doing your reading exercises, which we'll cover right now as well, when you're doing your the text completion exercises, of course, the more words you know, the better it is for you. But sentence equivalence is where you directly use your vocabulary knowledge because you are dealing with synonyms. So, the if you know the word sad and you know the word melancholy is the synonym of sad, basically you are good to go. So that is another type of question. And then you have the third type, which is basically simply a reading comprehension. Now, these two, they range from 3 to 5 questions per passage. You can get multiple passages, and those passages can be short in length, so they can be as short as one paragraph, 1 or 2 paragraphs, or they can be long that you might have to scroll. When you're doing your test on the screen, you would have to scroll and read the entire passage and then answer perhaps one question from a long passage, multiple questions, 2 to 3 questions from a long passage, or perhaps have 2 paragraphs worth of a passage with one question or multiple questions. So that's how it is. And so it's important to practice all those lengths and also the different types of passages that they give you. And then you have question types within these passages as well. So the passages that you have and the questions, the MCQs that you get, you would either get an MCQ that asks you to give just one option. So the option could just be, say, A, or you could just choose B. But then you have other types of questions that ask you to select multiple options. So for that, you'll have to click on multiple MCQs. As many answers that could be right, you have to click on those for the reading passages. So you have to be wary of those. You have to be wary of what those look like. I will show you what they look like next. But these are the 3 types of questions that you would primarily get in the verbal section. And this is true for both the verbal questions, the verbal sections. Okay. So this is one example of the verbal question. This question that you see right here is a text completion question. It basically has a single blank here. Now you could get a section with, multiple blanks as well. So 2 blanks or 3 blanks. And now you have an option of 5 that you have to choose from. And you have to select one entry for the blank, as it says here. Um, with this question, I will be going through, one of the strategies as well in terms of how you can, do a strategy question. And that right here is oops, my bad. That right here is the math strategy. So the math strategy, basically, my bad. There you go. Let me just click on a pointer here. Okay. So in the math strategy, you basically look at the sentence, but you look at it from a math point of view. And so when you read the sentence, you try to understand if it's trying to say something positive or if it's trying to say something negative. And so once you do that, you understand what kind of word should be there. Should it be a positive word or should it be a negative word? And that simply would help you to cancel out options that are not relevant. See, if it's a positive sentence, or it will require a positive word, and so you will cancel out the negative words, and that will help you to easily choose an answer, because the amount of options that you have will decrease. So if we read if we read the sentence, we say here that ironically, many people in distress seek not answers, but dash. When you have a semicolon basically shows that the thought process that will follow the sentence that precedes or that comes before the semicolon. So the thought process or the sentence after it will be the same. It will be of the same. It's going to be either positive or it's going to be negative. They're not going to be two opposing thoughts. Whereas if you have words like but or whereas, you will use a negative sign. You know that those two sentences will contrast. So here, since we know there's a semicolon, we know that two thoughts are following the same order. So perhaps here we see that ironically, many people in distress seek not answers but dash. They This will have the same thought process, so they want to be comforted, no matter how trite the reassurance. So the two words here to understand are trite and comforted. This person here is in distress. So they do not want answers, they want trite comfort. Trite comfort here is a positive word. They want to be comforted. Trite, if you know your vocab, this is where your vocab comes in, is something that means casual or something that is, said, without any thought, but just casual comfort. So the word that matches this would not be conflicts or deceptions, because these are negative words or insults. Then your vocabulary plays your role here, and you end up choosing the word platitudes. That would basically be something that you would fill in the blank. So vocabulary has a big role to play when you are attempting these questions. And so these are the little ideas or the little signs that you look for to understand whether it's a positive sentence or a negative sentence. So we have positive here, and we know this here is positive as well. And so we know that a positive equals positive. And so the answer would also have parts. So you simply just apply the math strategy and you have your vocabulary, and then you end up choosing this word. That is one of the strategies that you will learn, and then you will learn how to master it with different kinds of questions, whether it's easy, medium, or hard. Okay, moving on to the next question. Now, this is a sentence equivalence question. Now, see, there's a difference between how the MCQs, the multiple answers here are being presented. So here, you just have to select one. But here, you have to select multiple, and so that is indicated by a square. And because you have to select two synonyms here, it is important to use the elimination by pairing strategy. So what you do here is that you don't even have to read the sentence here, but you just have to form, you just have to form pairs of the words that are presented to you. So we know that we need two synonyms for this, for the sentence equivalence questions. We know that minimum and minimized and decreased are synonyms. So that is one pair. Then we know that enlarged, displayed, and presented are synonyms. But then we have enlarged and exaggerated. Although there are similar words, they are not synonyms. Because enlarged is something, the context is different, Enlarged means to have a bigger size of something tangible. And exaggerated is to extend something That is not tangible. And so these are not synonyms. Hence, these two options will be cancelled out. So since we need synonyms, these two options are cancelled out. So it's either going to be minimized and decreased, or it's going to be, whoops, I was supposed to cut this out, enlarged and exaggerated. So then it could either be this, or it could either be displayed and presented. Let me just get rid of this. Okay. So now when we read the sentence, it'll be easier to identify the synonyms. Taller than they appear, mountains have often have their true height dashed by the lack of depth perception in photographs. So we know it says here that even though the mountains they appear taller, so they actually appear taller, which means that their true height is dashed by the lack of depth. And the key word here to understand is the lack of depth in perception in photographs. So you know that the word that comes after in the fill in the blank would be the contrast of taller. And so we know that it would be that the true image of the mountain is not, conveyed accurately. And so if it's tall, that means that they'll probably be, presented in a shorter or a smaller size. And so the correct option here would be minimized and decreased. So this is basically how you use the elimination by pairing strategies. Once you identify those pairs, you are left with just 2 to 3 options that are actually synonyms, and you get rid of those options that are not synonyms. And so you have to be wary of two words that might sound similar but are actually not synonyms. And that is where your vocabulary again plays a really, really big role. All right, moving on to the next. Okay. Another strategy. Now, this is one for the. Can you all see my screen? Can you let me know if you can see my screen clearly? Okay. I will assume that you can see my screen. So basically, this is what a reading paragraph looks like. Because of the time constraint issues, I've only stuck to a shorter paragraph. But this paragraph is basically helpful in terms of understanding the strategy, which we call identifying the sentence function. So here, the question states that there are two bolded portions in the passage, and which of these, what role do these questions play? So the idea here is that when you are reading a passage, you have to read every line and try to understand what each sentence is doing. So not what it says, but what it's doing. So you have to understand the function of each, or the implication, or the, what the intention of that sentence is. So the first sentence says that trampolines are dangerous is undoubtedly clear. It's a very strong sentence, right? One need only browse hospital intake data to see the massive number of injuries resulting from these backyard toys. The second line is perhaps an evidence. So I'm trying to understand what the purpose of the second sentence is. Perhaps it's an evidence of, or a supporting argument for the claim that the author has made here, where it's the author has says that trampolines undoubtedly are extremely dangerous because of the amount of hospital intakes that you have caused by the injuries caused resulting from these backyard toys. So that is a statement, a strong statement, followed by a supporting claim or an evidence that supports it. The third sentence, however, starts with a but or say a contradictory statement. But an outright ban on trampolines is clearly flawed. So that's another strong claim, followed by not because kids will simply transition to other equally dangerous activities, but rather because such a ban is a patent example of government overreach. What's next? Swing sets. So the third sentence is basically just you know, a fact. It basically makes another statement. It basically states that yes, trampolines are dangerous, but banning them is a bad idea, not because the kids would find other risky activities, but because what other things will the government ban, or what other things will the government go and start banning? Because there's so many different swings that are dangerous and potentially harmful. So what are they going to target next? A swing set? So basically, what we have understood here is that we have an observation that is being supported by an argument, followed by another premise or another perhaps parameters that the author is introducing to argue why you can't fully ban them despite swings being dangerous. So now we've understood the purpose of the paragraph, and the question asks us what the role of those two bolded portions is. So we clearly go through the first one, which says the first is evidence supporting the argument's main conclusion. The second is a possible repercussion if an action is taken. The second one says the first is evidence supporting an unequivocal. Unequivocal means a claim that is very strong, which kind of matches what we were saying when we saw the first argument. And the second is a possible premise the author disputes. And that is exactly what it is. He supports a very strong observation, but then he also creates a premise as to why that observation, no matter how strong it is, cannot be fulfilled. So that's how we choose the second answer. We don't even need to read the next three because we have understood the function of the sentence. So when we're reading passages, we identify each and every sentence's function. So this was kind of like an overview of the verbal section. This is what the questions would look like, and these are only perhaps a few, of the strategies that you can use and apply to, understand, how you will approach your strategies when you're studying for the GRE next time. And the fact that you don't have to just plainly, blindly read a certain paragraph or read a certain passage, but perhaps read it with the intention that the GRE or the test makers want you to think of, like how, the intention they want you to think from. Moving on to the quant section. These are the type of questions that are asked in the quantitative section. We have the number one, quantitative comparison questions. So in these questions, you would have two values, A and B. They can be anything, but they would be comparison questions. And so you would have a multiple choice questions following those two values to state whether they're equal or whether they're not equal, whether one is greater than the other, and vice versa. And then whether the claim that you're making about the comparison of these two quantities, whether it can be made or not, whether we have sufficient information or not. These, when you start your quantitative sections, this will perhaps be one of the first, type of questions that you would see as soon as you press enter start. And the questions would range from about 4 to 5 questions in the quantitative section, which you would get in the start. They can also mix up a little bit towards the end, but during the start, you would get a quantitative comparison question. That is how your quant question will start. Now, some of these questions that where you have to make comparison will be extremely detailed, so you would have to take more time for that. But others would be not detailed at all. Perhaps you would just have two values written next to each other in different forms, and you would, through your strategy, have to you would know how to solve them, basically. So that is one question that you get, quantitative comparison questions. Then you have your multiple choice questions. These are your simple questions where you get different kinds of questions. They could be descriptive, they could be just tables, or they could be charts that you have to interpret. You could even get two charts or one graph and one chart, and then answer a multiple choice question, relevant to that. Um, so you would get a total of 4 to 6 questions on both the quant sections each. The difficult level would vary based on how you perform on the first quant section. And then again, you could have 1 to 2 graphs or charts with 1 to 3 questions each. And even here, you can either have a normal multiple choice, where you would just have to select one answer, or you would have to choose from, multiple select questions. These are not too common, but they do sometimes, surprisingly pop up, and then you have to do them where you have to basically select multiple options as answers. So you have to be wary of that. You have to be wary of what the question says, whether it's asking for one option or whether it's asking, for a range of options that you have to choose from. And the third type of questions that you get are the numeric entry questions. This is simply just the fact that you have to type your answer exactly as it is required. You have to you have to make sure that the decimal, so the answers can either be whole numbers, they can either be decimals, or they can be fractions. But in the case of a fraction, they will already have made the fraction for you, and all you would have to do is insert the numbers in the numerator, and then in the denominator. You could get 1 to 3 questions on the quant sections, each quant section. And so you have to make sure that the answer has to be exactly the same. So if it's 3, it has to be 3, it can't be 2.9. So this is something that's very important because it's a standardized exam. You have to make sure that you're very specific when you're performing, when you're attempting it. So these are the three main types of questions that you would get in the quant section. Now we'll just go through one example each for each type of question that I've talked about. The first strategy is the easiest strategy. It's called no math needed. So ironically, it's a math section, but you don't even need to do the math because of how simple or how straightforward it might be. So for instance, here we have the question that X is a uniformly distributed random variable that takes the first 25 positive integers. And now it shows you two quantities. So it's a very short sentence. It's giving you two quantities. You have the first quantity, which is a probability that X is between 5 and 10. And then you have a probability that X lies between 20 to 25. The key here is to not basically start calculating this step by step, but to understand the fact that they've written uniformly distributed random variables. Given that they are uniformly distributed, you automatically understand that the value that X takes is the same. So quantity A and quantity B are equal. So no thought needed, no math required, and you simply tick the two quantities are equal option, and then you're done. The other types of questions that you can get, however, within these quantitative comparative questions are that sometimes it might look easy. For instance, it looked easy here in this question, and it was easy. But here, it might look easy, but it's not that easy. So this is something that you master through practice. And so this is the strategy that you should understand and you should be aware of when attempting the GRE. It's called the equal not equal strategy. So the question here is pretty nice, short and sweet. It says two sides of a right angle triangle are 12 and 5. Then there's two quantities, which says quantity A, the area of the triangle, quantity B, 30. So let's make a right triangle. I wouldn't really do the best job at it. That's a right triangle. Let's assume this is a 90-degree angle. And then we have another right triangle. The two sides of a right triangle are 12 and 5. You calculate the area of this triangle. The area of a triangle is pretty straightforward, half into base into height. And so you end up getting 60 over 30, 60 over 2, which is a 30. So at first glance, you're really happy because you know that, oh, you know, the area of the triangle is 30. Now, most of you must have figured this out, that just because it's a right triangle, two sides does not mean that it has to be these sides. It could also be the hypotenuse. So it could also be 12 and 5 here. And then this could be the unknown side. And then this here could be the unknown side. So they haven't really specified here which side is 12 and then which side is 5. If it were this one, yes, these two quantities would have been equal. And the instinct is to, just get excited and quickly click on this option, but it's wrong. You have to understand that there's not enough information given to us for us to be able to answer this question properly. And so this is the option that we would go for. So sometimes the questions may seem extremely similar, extremely easy, extremely straightforward, but they aren't. And so you have to be extremely wary of that because otherwise, um, you're just going to get them wrong. And the best way to do that is to simply just practice. Practice your way through these questions. All right, moving on. Now we have the third type of question, which is the numeric entry question. This is how it will look like. And then you would have to type in your answer here. And you can enter your answer as an integer or a decimal, whatever form it takes, but then you have to be extremely precise. It cannot be imprecise. So this is another strategy that I will share with you. It's known as the pattern recognition strategy. The question here says, what is the unit digit of 3 plus 3 squared plus 3 cubed plus all the way to 350? Now, this seems extremely scary because there's multiple values here, there's big values here, and we don't know what the unit digit could be for these values. So the idea here is to understand that there will definitely be a certain type of pattern that you would have to identify for these questions. And to do that, you have to understand the strategy, which is the pattern recognition strategy. So let me just, right. So in order to do that, we will understand what unit digit means. So when we were back in school, we would, make a row of how to place our digits. And so we would organize them by unit, tens, hundreds, and thousands. So if this is your number, 310, which was my GRE score, this would be your unit value. So they're basically asking that what would be the unit value or the last value of the sum of this entire equation. In order to do that, we will break down the equation. And how will we do that? We will do that by finding the unit value of each component. So the unit value of this, the unit value of this, the unit value of this, simultaneously. So the first would be simply 3 raised to the power 1, which is 3. Now we'll find the unit value of these two. And so you have 3 plus 3 squared, which is 9, and you end up getting 12. Then you take the unit value of these. And then you do 12 plus 3 cubes are 27. And you end up getting that should be a 39. Yes, that should be a 39. And then the next one would then be 20, would be 39 plus 3 raised to the power 4, which is 81. Uh, and that would be 120. And then you have 120 raised to the power 3 fifth, which is 243. And so this would then be 343. So a way to do this quicker would be another tip to learn the cubes. So if you have to learn like the square roots, the cube roots up till 5. So up from 3 cubed to 3 raised to the power 5. So you need to memorize these because once they're on your fingertips, you would easily be able to do these quickly. Now, once you have a range of these values that you've taken out incrementally, you look at the unitary values of each and you see whether there's a pattern. So we have 3. The unitary value here is 2. The unit digit here is 9. And then we have 0. And then we have 3. So there we go. There's a pattern. The pattern is 3, 2, 9, 3. So let me just write it down here. 3, 2, 9, 0. This is the pattern because then it starts repeating from here on. So now that we've identified the pattern, we know that when you have a multiple of 4, the digit that you get is 0. So that is the fourth digit you get, which is 0. And when we look at the question here, we have 3 raised to the power 50. And the closest multiple of 4 that you have that is closest to 50 is 48. And so if you have 3 raised to the power 48, you would get 0 as the unitary value. And so you just add 2 to those, 2 to the 0 to get the 50th value. And so the one with the second position or with when you're adding 2 to the 0 would here be 2. So 3 raised to the power 50 would have the unit digit of 2. And so your answer here would be 2. This is just one of the strategies that you would slowly master. I know this may seem a bit overwhelming at start, but once you start practicing these strategies, and you start seeing the pattern that the GRE asks you questions in, it becomes a lot more easier to apply and to use and apply these strategies. So the key thing here is to just practice the strategies. Once you've understood the concepts, it's important to understand the strategies because you can't sit and solve these questions. If you have such complicated questions, it probably means that there's a strategy or there's a certain pattern that you have to understand. So these are some of the questions that you might, these are, so I've covered all the question types that you might get. There's 3 each for each section. And then I've also covered a few strategies just to give you sort of, a flavor of how the questions would look and just to get a broad idea in terms of how you would approach these questions. Let me quickly go through. Okay. Another key thing that you need to understand is that when you are on the verbal section, this is one thing that I forgot to mention, but say this is your question, and this right here is a sentence equivalence question. Every question weighs equally, no matter what. Just because a certain question has two dashes does not mean that it weighs more. So you either get the whole question right or you either get it wrong. So if even though this was the answer to my question, if I had mistakenly chosen one right answer and then one wrong answer, the whole question would be wrong. So, in order to get one score, I need to get the whole thing right. So, if I have three fill in the blanks and I get two of them right, but one of them wrong, the whole question would be wrong. So, it's a bit unforgiving when it comes to that. And same is the case for quantitative as well. If you have a question that has multiple choice, it's a multiple choice questions, and you have to select multiple answers. If you select one right and one wrong, the entire question will be wrong. So every question weighs equally here. I hope that's clear as well. Now I'll just quickly, very broadly touch upon the essay section. This will kind of be the first section that you have to do. So as soon as you start your GRE, you will begin with your essay, which is also known as your analytical writing section. You will just have one, this is just one passage that you have to interpret. Initially, I mean, during my time, it used to be two, but now it's one. So you have to do that within 30 minutes. It's not that technical. It's perhaps the easiest, which is why I'm touching upon this on towards the end. But the idea here is that there's just one structure that you have to follow blindly. Your English does not have to be stellar. You just need to have a good idea in terms of how you construct your sentences. The idea is that you just have to make sure you follow that certain format, and you will be good to go. You will get a good score. I think when it comes to essay, I think 4 to 6 is a good score. Anything below that is questionable, but it doesn't matter because it depends on the program again that you're applying to. So if you're applying to a math heavy program and your essay turns out to be a 3.5, it's not a problem, right? But again, it wholly depends on the department or the program that you're applying to. But on average, a good score would range from 4 to 6. Okay, so now let's move on to the essay. This is what this is how your screen would look like when you start your exam. It says right here, section 105. This is the interface. This is what it looks like. And this I've given you everything here. You have your paragraph that you have to use when you start the essay. You will quickly go through the essay, the paragraph, the passage here. And so this right here is your passage, and then this is just the standard response, the question that you would have to answer. It's pretty standard. You follow one format and you'll make it. So this is the passage. It says, as societies advance, the preservation of cultural heritage becomes increasingly important, even at the cost of modern development. So this is just a specific idea that they have given to you. And the idea here is to build upon this idea and then write your essay there to analytically the purpose is just for them to understand that you have critical thinking skills and that your analytical skills are decent. So what you will do is that you will write a standard 5 paragraph essay here. You will include an introduction, which will include your thesis statement and the outline. So the thesis statement would basically be a line which basically shows which basically kind of like highlights or outlines the entire idea that you are about to convey in one line. So kind of like a summary of your idea and a summary of what you have interpreted from this passage that is given to you here. And then you will provide an outline of the entire essay, which will be that these are the points that I'll be touching upon. And then and then I will build upon those points in the next incoming paragraphs. So you start with a thesis statement, which shows whether you believe or whether you agree or disagree with the statement. So let's say you agree with the statement. You will write a one-line thesis, 1 or 2 line thesis statement, where you will tell that, it is important to preserve cultural heritage because it is essential for societies to grow. That's it. That's your belief. That's your thesis right there. And then you will provide an outline of all the income points that you will be touching upon. So, after writing down the thesis and the outline, you will introduce your body paragraphs. And each paragraph will basically provide a reason as to why you believe this. One will be a supporting reason. Paragraph one will be a supporting reason. You will build upon that. So if you say that this is, the reason as to why, because it's important to understand, one point could be because it's important to understand our history, because if we understand our history better, we will be able to understand ourselves better, and we will be able to understand our future better. And so you can write a paragraph on that, build upon that reason. Then a second paragraph, perhaps with another reason. And then the third paragraph is important because there has to be a counterpoint, right? You have to provide a concession because that is what basically shows that you have analytical skills or not. So the concession point or the counterpoint would be something that would, you would say something that goes beyond what you believe in, because you have to make them understand that although you believe in something, it's not a strong belief. You understand that there might be loopholes in that belief. So you could say something like, yes, like it's important to preserve history. I mean, but then history can be so subjective. History can be, it can be misinterpreted, or it can be wrong or missing altogether. But, and then counter that concession or counterpoint further. But it is still important we have those recollections with us so that we can use them for our betterment. And it's important to make an extra effort to be able to, preserve those, historical elements. So that's all there needs to be when it comes to your essay. You introduce it, you make sure there's a thesis statement, you make sure there's an outline. Two, 2 to 3 reasons, 2 reasons should be good enough. The third reason should be a counterpoint that you mentioned, but you then again emphasize on the importance of what you believe in. And then you conclude where you give no new information. It is just a summary of what all that you have talked about in, 4 to 5 lines. And then you conclude. And that is all there is to an essay. There's no need to use fancy words. There's no need to introduce stellar ideas. It just has to be you just have to make sure you follow a certain format, and they see that you've, made a thesis statement, provided an outline, given 2 to 3 reasons, where one of them is a counterpart, a counterpoint, and then you end it by concluding the same thought process in a summary form, basically. So this is how it is. You will start off with an essay, and then you will have, you know, your standard verbal and quantitative exercises, which will appear in, 2 different orders. And so you should be prepared for both of them. Yeah. So someone here has asked if the essay in GRE is similar to the essay in IELTS. So I haven't given IELTS, so I wouldn't have an idea about that. But the point is that the essay is nothing, exclusive or new or scary. It's pretty basic. It's a certain thought process that you have to build upon, and that's all there is to it. And if you do it in this standard paragraph format, you will be good to go. And you don't have to worry about any of that. Just make sure that your sentence structure is good and your points are good. So once before you start off with your essay, I would recommend that you just create a little sort of an outline for yourself. You build a thesis statement because that will be the opening statement of the whole essay that you write. and then you just kind of like write down your points or your reasons in bullet points, and that's about it. You have a counterpoint ready and you're good to go. Just start writing it down. So take around like 5 minutes to just jot, to kind of have an outline ready, and then the resting 25 minutes to type that essay out. Okay. So that's about it. This is kind of like the entire overview of, how you would go about your GRE prep. Before we end and we go on for question answer sessions, we have time for that. I'll just go through reflections of what we have learned. We have touched upon the overall content for the GRE. We have also gone through the different kinds of questions that they have, the different order that it will come in, and then how you should approach studying it. So you will not study it like how you study for a general test, but rather a standardized test, which is very important. You have to understand that knowing the content is not enough. You have to practice the strategies, you have to master the strategies, and then you have to do that in a timely manner. And so you need to be very strategic about it. The idea is to assess yourself and then prepare for it. So yeah, knowing what the test really, really requires is extremely important. Once you know that, you'll be able to have a better plan that basically caters to you and your skills and your needs and the time that you have. You need to personalize your plan. I could have gone and just, copy pasted like a schedule for you to easily follow and then, give the GRE, but that wouldn't be good enough because one size doesn't fit all, and everyone, because, we have different people from different ages applying for the GRE, people at different stages of their lives applying, studying for the GRE. You can't give them one plan that they have to go with. The idea is to assess yourself, and then I've told you that the average amount of time that you need should be 2 to 3 months, and that's it. Some people have given it in 1 month, some people have given it after studying for 4 months. So it's, entirely specific to how you've prepared for it. Another really important point, which I stress upon over and over again, is quality over quantity. The idea is to not gather every book that I have gone through. The idea is to understand that you start with ETS materials. A lot of you have asked me what sources do I think are the best. I'll say it again very clearly. To begin your practice, you need to start with the content that has been provided by the makers of the GRE, because no one other than them understands it fully 100%. So ETS resources are extremely important. Make sure you get a hold of those. Begin with ETS resources. Once you have mastered the strategy, mastered the content, the strategy, and finished, understood how to follow time, then you move on to the other resources. So then for that, my personal recommendation would be GregMat. But just because I'm saying GregMat does not mean that Magoosh is bad. Magoosh is equally good. It's just that you stick to one study plan and you stop doubting it. You don't say that, oh, I'm not sure if this is if this is a good enough resource. The best resource is ETS. Beyond that is just additional practice. And so I would recommend ETS followed by GregMat or Magoosh. And then additional resources would be, Barron's book, it would be Princeton Review, and then there's the big book that is again by ETS. It's not on the main website, but again, you can find PDF for it. It's a big, big book, literally. So I believe you do not need more books to study from. You would not have more time. I mean, if you're someone who has 5 to 6 months, then go ahead, practice as much as you can, but then just remember quality over quantity. You can't blindly be answering questions and not consciously realizing whether you have applied a strategy or not. So you have to consciously make a note that yes, this is that particular strategy, the no math needed strategy that I have, for example, I have used it here. If you're blindly answering a question, it's taking you so much time, there's no point. So the idea here is quality. practice smart and consistently. So now, if you know where you are, if you've assessed yourself, the point is to go on ChatGPT, use AI, and plan something for yourself, given your skill level. It's very easy to do that now. You do not need, I will not give you my study plan because you and I are not the same. So the idea is to assess yourself and then make a study plan based off of that. Ask ChatGPT to help you out for that. And then vocabulary matters. A lot of the people, based off of my observation, they don't really prioritize um, vocabulary that much. So for them, it's just like even if we do 500 words, or or we can start vocabulary after we're done with quantitative and qualitative. That's not how it should be. Vocabulary is something that you should begin with. So before you start with quant, before you start with verbal, you open a notebook, you take out your flashcards, and you write down 10 words. You write down 20 words, as many as you can, depending on your schedule. You write those words, you write their meanings, and then you write a sentence to understand their context. And then you learn them, and then you revise them consistently. So simultaneously with your math and your verbal section, you are covering vocabulary simultaneously. Do not eat it, leave it for the end. You need to build your muscle memory, and the best way to do is to do it every day and to be consistent in it. And then just learn from your mistakes. Just be extremely honest to yourself. It's normal to, have this instinct to, just quickly, check the answer from the back, and you're like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing too. But you're not being honest. I've done that. So I know how easy it is to like, to flip the page back to the answers and say and see that whether you've done the right thing or not. Do not do that. Make sure, pretend as if the answers are not there. So make sure you are completely honest to yourselves, because if you're not going to be honest, you will not progress, and then it's just going to be, you know, hodgepodge for you. And another very, very important reflection would be to stay calm and confident. I think one key fact is to be confident, even if you do not have the best prep in your head on the test day, going to the center, you need to be confident. You need to pretend and fool yourself into thinking that you know everything, and you will be able to back it. Because, first, if you have a positive attitude, going into a center where, or into a setting where, there is a time constraint, it can be very daunting. So, even if you know your content, just a negative attitude or just being nervous, it's normal to be nervous, but letting it get to you will definitely affect your performance, no matter how great you are. Because again, it is a time, there is a time constraint, it is a standardized exam. So just make sure that you're confident. And the most tangible thing to be able to achieve that confidence is to just study, to just be consistent, and to practice as much as you can. So that should be it from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to share them. I will try to get back to those questions as much as I can. Just trying to. Uh, mm, okay. So if anyone has any questions, they can, feel free to ask those questions. I will go through your questions. I've tried to answer as much as I can while I was presenting, but I'll go through the questions again just to make sure that I've covered most questions. Okay. So the top two resources that I recommended were ETS and then GregMat or Magoosh. How early do we need to book the GRE in Pakistan? I don't believe that booking the GRE is an issue because it's happening occasionally every month or so. You have your GRE, so it depends really on your schedule. So if you can give it next month, there will definitely be a test available that month, and then you can book for it. They usually happen during like they usually take place on weekends, on Saturdays. So yeah, you can book it whenever, but it's not that it happens like once a year or twice a year that you have to book it just now. It happens every month or so, and then the point is to just book it. One tip would be to just book it and don't wait. Don't start preparing and then book once you think you are prepared. Make sure you register for it and then work under that pressure to really you know, make sure that your preparation is effective. Is it okay to do quant prep first and then verbal? Yes, it's completely fine as long as you're not ignoring vocabulary. I Everyone has a different way to prepare. There's no wrong way to prepare. The only thing that I would say is to build your vocabulary throughout the journey. So from the start to the end, make sure you're doing a certain amount of words every day consistently. Um, Personally, in terms of my experience, I think doing both the sections side by side is helpful. But if you think you can, get done and, be done and get rid of quant first, that would be awesome. You can do that. If you believe you need more practice with verbal, you can start with verbal, or you could do both. So it completely just depends on you. Again, the score depends on, it completely depends on you, on the program that you're interested, your background. So if you want, if you're an engineering student, I think a minimum of 325 is good. If you want to get into a good university, or 320, or 315 even is good, depending on which university you want to go to. If give the test point one. Okay, so if you attempt the test and you do really really good in quant, you get say a 165, but in verbal you do not do as good. You do 143. Unfortunately, you cannot register for one section. You have to register for the entire test. So you have to retake the entire test. You have to sit through the 2 hours, which is not that bad because it used to be four before. So the test gods are being really nice at this point. So yeah, if you do bad in one section, you have to give the entire test again. You cannot give one section again and improve your score, unfortunately. There's equal weightage on all questions, whether they're lengthy questions, whether there's multiple fill in the blanks in those questions. Um, they weigh equal. And unfortunately, if you get, one wrong out of if there's three blanks and you get two right and one wrong, the whole question will be considered wrong. So that's what it is. Magoosh is a good source, and I think I've answered all these questions. Um, Yeah, and the essay is pretty simple. You don't need to give essay too much time unless you're someone who struggles with sentence formation and has, a long way to go. Um, but otherwise, it's not really something you should waste your time on. And then you have, is there a fee? Yes, there is unfortunately a fee. There's a cost to everything. And the fee for your GRE is around, I think it's around like $220 if I'm not wrong, which should be around 60,000 rupees, Pakistani rupees. Uh, I am slow in writing. Would it affect my essay or overall score? So the good thing is that essay is different from the other two sections. So you have the quant section, the qual section, they are weighed together, they are scored together. So you have 170 for quant, 170 for qual, adding up to 340 total score. And then your essay is scored differently. It's scored from a range of 0 to 6. So even if you do bad in your essay, say you get a 3, you will that will not affect your GRE score. That score will be based the quant and the verbal score will be based on your performance in those four sections basically. So I mean, if you're slow in writing, it will affect your essay unless you practice. But if you stick to one format, it's just that you have to think of a thought and just write it down. It shouldn't, don't give it too much thought, in my opinion. But it will not affect your final score. The one that is out of 340, and that is what usually people ask. My essay score was 5, and I did not give it too much thought. I just made sure to follow the format. But the main score is perhaps your GRE, the total 340 score that you have to focus on. Do spelling mistakes matter in, um, I mean, it depends on how bad you are. I don't think they matter that much if you make typos, but just make sure what you're writing is legible, and make sure that your spellings are not extraordinarily bad, because that just might generally, like, naturally put off the person who's checking it. Like they wouldn't really like that. It will, piss them off, and then that might result in them not giving you a good score, even if your thoughts were good, but your spellings were terrible. Is this GRE test important for someone who is an English linguistic major? Um, so it depends on the program that you are going through to. Some English language, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in this, but based off of what I've seen around me, there are some departments that, in universities abroad, in the US specifically, where for the linguistic department, you have to have a good GRE score, especially in the verbal. But then there are some programs that do not require the GRE to begin with. So there are programs that for which you don't need to apply, for which you don't need to attempt the GRE. Um, but most programs require the GRE because it's a good leveling field. So it's important to prepare for it. So not all universities need it, and most of them, like most of the departments that don't require, are like just departments that are not that math heavy, but some do. So that's how it is, basically. Are there any more questions? Okay. So I think that should be it. Oh, there's another question. Are results available instantly after you finish? Yes, they are, except for the essay. So your verbal and quant scores will be given to you as soon as you finish the test. But the essay, because someone has to check it, they have to go through it. It will take a while, a few weeks perhaps. But the other scores you will learn instantly, which will be a surprise. Okay. Okay, so I'll wrap up the session now. I hope this session was helpful. I wish you all the very best of luck for your GRE journey. Good luck with the preparation, and just make sure you're focused. Just make sure that you're consistent, and if once you're in the center, just make sure you're confident no matter how your preparation is, and it should be good. So, thank you everyone for joining this session. I hope you all have a great day, and I hope you all have a great journey as well. Thank you so much.